Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning. That is your channel for all things magic. The Kitchen Table series, our longest running content series here on the channel, returns with its 66th deck tech. And today, we're going to take a look at a Grishoalbrand deck. What's up, MTGBC? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to another episode of the Kitchen Table series. This is deck tech number 66 in MTG Burgeoning's longest running content series. I can't believe we're up to deck tech number 66. Wow, what a ride it's been. So in today's video, we are going to show off a very cool and playable Grishoalbrand deck. What we're going to do is we're going to find a way to get Grishoalbrand into play as quickly as possible, sometimes as early as our first turn, and then win the game based upon what he does. Now, before we get to that, we have a little thing to talk about, as in the mana base. As generally is customary here during the Kitchen Table series, we begin with the mana base. We're going to start with 8 basic swamps, and we're going to continue that with 8 basic mountains. Now, before proceeding any further with this deck tech, I would definitely share with the MTGBC that the mana base of this deck is definitely one that is worth upgrading. At this point in time, I'm just waiting for additional copies of particular lands to become available so that we can replace the basics with full play sets of lands like Blood Crypt. Currently, this has just 1 copy of Blood Crypt, but when 3 more become available, they will be added to the deck. They will be added to the lands in this deck. Same thing to be said about Black Cleave Cliffs. Of course, we're looking for 1 more copy. We've got 3 in the deck right now, but once 1 more becomes available, it will take the place of 1 of the basic lands, because we want to make sure that we can use black or red mana as early as turn 1 and make sure that we can do it either way we need to. So we can go as far as to say at some point down the line that we would throw in 4 Bloodstained Mires as a way in which to cheat out, or fetch out, I should say, a Blood Crypt to the battlefield first turn if needed. But as it stands right now, currently we've got 8 swamps, 8 mountains, 1 Blood Crypt, and 3 copies of Black Cleave Cliffs. As I said, the mana base is one that could receive upgrades in the future. However, the deck plays very well with the lands that we have right now, but we're just looking for a greater level of ease and consistency. With the mana base out of the way, let's introduce the big man himself. We've got Grishoalbrand. We've got a 7/7 demon with flying and lifelink for 4 and 4 black, and I can promise you that we are never going to pay 4 and 4 black to get him out onto the battlefield. He has an ability that lets us pay 7 life to draw 7 cards. So this is what we're going to do. We want to cheat 1 of these copies of Grishoalbrand out onto the battlefield. And then we want to pay 7 life as much as we need to draw as many cards as we possibly can so that we can hit our win conditions. As we're paying 7 life each time to draw 7 cards, it's going to be important for us to regain some of that life, because let's face it, if we're starting with 20, we can do that exactly 2 times if we don't have haste with Grishoalbrand in order to attack on that first turn. So as a way in which to get some extra life to make sure that we can continuously draw cards from our library to search out our win condition, we have a full play set of Nourishing Shoal. Now, as you'll notice, Nourishing Shoal has no black or red in its mana cost, and all of our land base are either black or red. So how are we going to cast this spell? Well, we may exile a green card with converted mana cost X from our hand other than paying this spell's mana cost, and then we will gain X life. So we want to make sure that we have at least 1 of those green creatures in our hand so that we can pay Nourishing Shoal's mana cost without paying it. And how we're going to do that is pairing up 1 Nourishing Shoal with 1 World Spine Worm. World Spine Worm is a 15/15 trampling worm for 8 and 3 green mana. When paired with Nourishing Shoal, however, because it is a green card, we can exile World Spine Worm from our hand and we can play Nourishing Shoal for free. And then that way we will be able to gain, how much life is that going to be, folks? Converted mana cost X, we're going to gain 11 life when we exile World Spine Worm through Nourishing Shoal. So that will allow us to activate more of Grishoalbrand's pay 7 life to draw 7 cards ability. And if we get more copies of Nourishing Shoal and more copies of World Spine Worm in our hand, we can continue that process until we get to the very near bottom of our library, which at some point in time we would have drawn enough to win the game. What are we trying to draw? There are 1 of 2 copies of cards that we're trying to get into our hand so that we can cast it and get it out onto the battlefield so that we can win the game. 2 copies of Borborygmus Enraged. It's a 7/6 trampler for 4, 2 red and 2 green, but we're never going to cast it because we don't have the green lands to cast it. We're going to cheat it out onto the battlefield the same way that we're cheating out Grishoalbrand. And when Borborygmus deals combat damage to a player, we reveal the top 3 cards of our library and put all land cards revealed this way into our hand and the rest into our graveyard. That's not bad. I mean, 7/6 trample, if we're starting with 20 life, that's 3 attack phases. What's a lot better than that, however, is Borborygmus's last ability, which allows us to discard a land card and have Borborygmus Enraged deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So with 1 of 2 copies of this out on the battlefield with the Grishoalbrand, paying 7 life as many times as we can, gaining additional life by exiling World Spine Worm with Nourishing Shoal to gain that life, to use it to pay Grishoalbrand's cost of 7 life to draw 7 cards, we're going to have nearly every single land in our hand. We cheat Borborygmus into play, we discard 7 lands and kill 1 opponent. We discard another 7 lands to kill another opponent, and therefore we have pretty much wiped the floor with our opponents. That is the win condition of this deck. Borborygmus into play, Grishoalbrand acting as the engine to getting it into our hand, with our peripheral life gain being World Spine Worm exiling to Nourishing Shoal. That is what we're trying to do. So, how are we going to get Grishoalbrand and Borborygmus out onto the battlefield? Oh, I'm just tickled that you were to ask that. Let's talk about a full play set of Goryo's Vengeance. It is an instant for 1 and a black. We can return target legendary creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and that creature gains haste, and we exile it at the beginning of the next end step. This also has the splice onto Arcane mechanic, which allows us to play this card for its arcane cost, creating a copy of this card onto the arcane spell, leaving this physical card into our hand. It's an additional 1 colorless mana to do that, but it is an option that's available to us because we do have some other arcane spells at our disposal. 4 copies of Goryo's Vengeance that will allow us to pay 1 and a black mana to get 1 of those creatures from our graveyard right into play with haste. Another way to get those creatures from the graveyard into play, another way to sneak these creatures onto the battlefield, Goryo's Vengeance will get them into play with haste from our graveyard, and Through the Breach will get them into play with haste from our hand. It is an instant, it is an arcane, it's 4 and a red, but we can splice it onto an additional arcane spell for a reduction of for a 1 mana value reduction down from 4 and a red to 2 and 2 red. We may put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste, and then we have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And again, that does have the slight reduction if we splice it onto an arcane spell. So if we have one of those creatures in our hands, most likely we want to have Grishoalbrand first, of course, because without having the additional cards in our hand, having Borborygmus in play is not going to really advance our game plan very much. With a Through the Breach, we can cast this and get Grishoalbrand into play from our hand. 4 copies of Through the Breach. So you're probably wondering to yourself, how are we going to be able to do all of this without the requisite mana to do so? I mean, you're talking about a potential turn 1 win. Well, let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do here and talk about some of the other spells that we have that might help us to advance this game plan. So let's turn our attention to the mana again once more. These are not so much lands as they are, let's call them one-trick ponies to give us some mana. We'll start with Manamorphose. This is 1 in a red. Of course, it's not going to be green because we don't have green in this deck. This will add 2 mana in any combination of colors to our mana pool, and it will replace itself by drawing us a card. 3 copies of Manamorphose. In addition to that, we're going to play with a full play set of Desperate Ritual. It is another one of our arcane spells, so we can splice this onto one of our Through the Breaches or our Goryo's Vengeance if needed, and the casting cost is the same as the splice, meaning that we can just imprint this card's abilities onto the arcane and then keep the physical card in our hand to cast again. And when we pay the 1 in a red, we're going to add 3 red mana to our mana pool, 4 copies of Desperate Ritual. And lastly, as a way in which to cheat out and do exactly what we need to do, a full play set of Simian Spirit Guide. It's a 2/2 creature for 2 in a red. We are never going to cast this creature. It is not going to happen because when it's in our hand, we're going to exile it and add a red mana to our mana pool. 4 copies of Simian Spirit Guide. In conjunction with Simian Spirit Guide and one of our dual lands that we showed earlier, or the right matching of colors, we're able to cast a Desperate Ritual or cast the Manamorphose and then start moving into the spells that we need to get Grishoalbrand into play, and then start paying the 7 life each turn or each instance to get those cards into our hand, and it just snowballs from there. There are a few other cards that we want to talk about as a way in which to support this engine, because it is possible that we don't have the cards that we need in our hand, particularly Grishoalbrand, so we want to make sure we get them into our graveyard. And one quick way to do that is by casting Entomb. We pay 1 black mana at instant speed. We're going to search our library for a card. It's going to be Grishoalbrand, and we're going to put it into our graveyard. 3 copies of Entomb. And lastly, as a way in which to really get things going, if we're starting to stall out, or just to put the finishing touches on what we're doing on turn 1, or more likely turn 2, we're going to have a full play set of Faithless Looting. This is a sorcery for 1 in a red. We're going to draw 2 cards, and then we're going to discard 2 cards. And we can also flash this card back for 2 in a red mana. So if we have the Grishoalbrand in our hand, we can cast Faithless Looting, we can discard Grishoalbrand, and then through the use of our other spells and other mana sources, we can most likely cast a Goryo's Vengeance, we can get Grishoalbrand into play, start paying the 7 life, drawing the cards, gaining more life by exiling Worldspine Worm to the Nourishing Shoal, and we keep going until we can cheat Borborygmus into play, either by using Through the Breach or Goryo's Vengeance, and then all of those lands that we've drawn from our library, they turn into lightning bolts, and then we win the game. And there you have it, MTGBC. This is Grishoalbrand. This is a higher power deck than I usually present here at the kitchen table. And I promise you this, it is a deck that seldom loses, even with a very watered down and nerfed mana base. Let me know your thoughts about this deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.